Hi, everybody. Glad to see you all virtually. I'm imagining you out there once again. Thank you for joining me. So this is the day 2 of revision. Uh, it was very interesting process for me. This is the first time I've done anything like this. Frequently when I give writing assignments in classes I'm teaching, I should say I'm Toi Derricotte. If you didn't tune in yesterday, I'm a poet. I've been writing a long time and was very pleased that Nancy Kuehl invited me to share a writing moment with you, some writing that I did in the present and talk about it and revise it and talk about that with you. So this is day 2. It's a very interesting process, and probably from the poem you'll be aware of how this is feeling to me. So we've talked about and read the poem yesterday. So maybe I'll just read the revision where it's at right now on day 2, which I just finished about 20 minutes ago. What a poem is discovered by writing it. In the middle of the night, awake, anxious about my talk tomorrow, in which I'll read a poem I just wrote to strangers. I listen to Pima children tell me to just look at the fearful, hated self with compassion. Be ready to open your heart and hold it. And it gave me something to write about. I've been dreading, but ready to write my worst secret. As I often do, put a pen in my meanest hand and force myself to do damage. As if by hurting myself, as my father did, I could do good. But instead, this time, as Pima said, I held myself carefully, like you hold a yoke, and I found myself thinking about the great poet Adrienne Rich, of how every day she sat at her desk for 8 hours and how in the later days, after diving into the wreck, she started dating her poems. She began to believe that poems aren't eternal, but like the day itself, changing, moving ahead as we move, as we stand beside what we write, as we're led there. So how did I get from the first draft to this draft today? Well, one of the things I want to talk about is how pressure is good. The pressure in this case, of course, is time. As a matter of fact, today I was very busy before I'm talking to you. My children and grandchildren decided last week they wanted me to teach them a workshop called Writing with Grandma. So an hour before seeing you here today, I was with a Zoom group all around the country of people who I got to write poems. And I wrote a poem myself. And it was a very lovely experience, and we're going to do it every week for a while. So I had a lot on my plate today, and it made me nervous, but I'm frequently nervous before I do a reading or do anything public. When there's pressure on a deadline and a public event, I just want to do really good. But in another way, that pressure sort of does something good for me. I don't know if it releases some kind of hormone or something like makes me think better or something. I don't know. Maybe if I had a month to think about this, it would be, I don't know, maybe not even as good as this is. And You know, I think that's one of the things a lot of writers, all writers probably, are really afraid that will fail. But perhaps when you have a limited amount of time, you know, you're thinking, well, you know, it's not going to be perfect. I've got, you know, a few hours to do it. And maybe there's a little more forgiveness there, or maybe you imagine your audience, even if it's the audience in your own head, to be a little more forgiving. But poems come from this very magical place. Ruth Stone always said, when they asked, where do you get your poems from? She said, you just stick your hand up in the universe like it's a baseball mitt, and the poems fly in. She said, but if your hand isn't up there, the poems fly past you. They're still flying, whether you've got your hand up or not. So for me, what I did in revising this poem, Tobias asked me how long did it take me to revise it from yesterday to today? And I said 70 years, because, you know, there's a lot that I've learned, shortcuts that I'm just doing naturally as my brain reads a first draft. You know, there are many things I'm seeing instantly when I reread it. And in fact, yesterday when I was reading the poem as I had written it, Tobias said, what are you reading? And he said, I don't have a copy of what you're reading. And it was because as I was reading what he had a copy of, I was changing it. I was revising it. So what do you say about revision? I guess what makes the poem really great is this idea about form and space. And time has something to do with that too. I mean, Rilke had 10 years before he wrote the Duino elegies up in his castle. So we are given this limited time here. We're sort of locked in because of the virus. And it creates a kind of space, a form. And it imaginatively creates a space. Time can be a kind of space that we fill with something we can imagine that fits in that space. So for me, it can be a poem. And as it was for this writing exercise. Now it's going to be a great mystery what happens for tomorrow. I might be done with this poem and there's nothing else I can do with it. Or I might tear it apart and start all over. So thank you for watching. Let's see what happens next. Bye.